On my stepson's 18th birthday, he handed me a half-eaten slice of German chocolate cake and a manila envelope and said, "It's time you moved on, Jack." My wife held up her phone recording, and somebody at the table laughed. I just smiled, signed the divorce papers inside, and walked out of my own family dinner. The AC rattled above our heads. The smell of burned French fries drifted in from the kitchen. Marcy sat across from me in her sparkly blue blouse lipstick, perfect, one hand on her wine glass and the other on her phone, glancing down every few seconds to see if anyone had liked the little video clip she'd just posted. To her left sat Ethan, 18 candles worth of attitude, and cologne hunched over his own phone. The waitress had just brought out his slice of cake, the one with 18 written in blue icing. He took a couple of bites, set his fork down, then looked up at me with a strange, rehearsed half-smile. "Here," he said, sliding the dessert plate across the table. "Got you something, too." The cake had one corner gone, fork mark still in the frosting. Under the rim of the plate was the envelope. My name, Jack Collins, was written across the front in Marcy's loopy handwriting. I didn't touch it right away. I just stared at Ethan. This kid I'd taught to bait a hook and change oil on an old Ford was leaning back in his chair like he was handing me a bill, not gutting me in front of a dozen people at the Bluebird Diner. Marcy kicked things along. "Come on, Jack," she said, angling her phone so it caught my face and the envelope in the same frame. "Don't be weird. It's your turn to open a present. From all of us." Somebody down the table snorted. The scrape of a chair, a nervous cough. The whole place went a little quieter, like even the strangers in the next booth knew something wasn't right. I picked up the envelope. My fingers left little grease prints on the paper. I could hear the AC humming, feel it blowing cold air on the bald spot I pretend I don't have. My heart didn't race. It felt like a big block of ice had settled behind my ribs. Inside were divorce papers. Not a card, not a joke. Real papers already filled out, my name typed neatly under respondent. There was a sticky note on top in Marcy's handwriting, "All you have to do is sign." I looked up at her. She smiled like we were all in on the same joke. "Easier this way," she said. "You don't like conflict, remember?" Ethan cleared his throat and finally met my eyes. "It's time for you to go, Jack," he said. "You make everybody uncomfortable." He sounded like he was reading off a script somebody else had written for him. I could see Marcy's hand tighten just a little around her phone. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the cake. I didn't flip the table like some guy on daytime TV. I thought about all the overtime shifts at the plant, all the Saturdays I'd skip fishing with the guys because Ethan had a game, or Marcy wanted to drive to Des Moines to look at houses we might afford someday. And then I did the one thing nobody at that table expected. I smiled. "All right," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost bored. "If that's what you want." I pulled the pen out of my shirt pocket. Marcy lifted her phone a little higher. The screen reflected in her glasses, my face tiny in the corner. I flipped through the pages, saw the dates, the neat check marks that already decided who got what. I signed where the little yellow flags told me to sign. When I was done, I tucked the pen back into my pocket, slid the papers back into the envelope, and set it gently on top of the half-eaten cake. "Happy birthday, kid," I said to Ethan. "Hope this works out better for you than it did for me." I stood up. My chair scraped loud against the tile. Nobody said a word. The waitress froze halfway to the table with another basket of fries. The smell of grease and cheap coffee pressed in around me as I walked past the counter, past the families who suddenly found their menus fascinating. Marcy called after me, voice half laugh, half nervous. "Jack, don't be dramatic," she said. "We're just making things official." I didn't answer. I pushed open the glass door and stepped out into the Iowa evening. The heat hit me first. That kind of heavy late summer heat that sticks to the back of your neck. The parking lot shimmered under the streetlights, patchy and cracked with a few weeds poking through where nobody had bothered to spray this year. My truck sat where I'd left it, old blue F-150 with a rust spot on the rear wheel well and an American flag sticker curling at the edges of the back window. I climbed in, shut the door, and just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing. That's when the shaky part hit me. Not back in the diner under Marcy's camera, not when I saw the papers. Sitting in that truck alone, I felt my hands start to tremble. My breath came out in short bursts. 55 years old Army veteran, 20 years at the Cedar River packaging plant, and I just let a woman hand me divorce papers on a greasy dessert plate without putting up a fight. You probably expect me to say I was furious, and for a second sure something hot flared up in my chest. But it fizzled out quick, swallowed by something colder and heavier. I wasn't mad. I was tired. I started the engine. Instead of pulling out, I grabbed my phone off the dash and stared at the screen. Texts from Marcy were already popping up. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You knew this was coming. This is best for everyone. I slid my thumb across the screen and opened my contacts instead. Scrolled down until I hit Tom VFW. Tom and I met at the Veterans of Foreign Wars post in Cedar Rapids about 6 years back. He's 10 years older than me, used to wear a Lynn County badge. He picked up on the second ring. You all right, Jack? It happened, I said. They did it tonight, at Ethan's birthday dinner. He went quiet for a second. Hell, he said finally. You at home? Parking lot, I said. Bluebird. You want me to come down there? I watched through the windshield as Marcy came out of the diner phone, still in her hand, Ethan a step behind her. She looked around like she expected me to be standing there waiting for them. When she didn't see the truck moving, she shrugged and went back to talking to the little screen in her palm. Nah, I said, I'm all right. That what you call it, he asked gently. They think they blindsided me, Tom, I said. Like I didn't see any of this coming. Did you? He asked. I let out a long breath. I stopped being blind a while ago, I said. Just hadn't decided what to do about it yet. He was quiet again. You come by the post tomorrow, Tom said. We'll talk it through, and Jack. You and das schon meint. Don't sign anything else till you've had someone look at it. I pictured that envelope still sitting on the table on top of that mangled slice of cake. Too late for that part, I said. But I get what you mean. We hung up. I set the phone back on the dash and finally shifted the truck into reverse. As I backed out, I caught one last glimpse of Marcy in the rearview mirror, her face lit up by her screen laughing at something that wasn't me. They thought this was the beginning of my exit, the part where I walked away and left them to the life they'd been building behind my back. What they didn't know was that some exits are really entrances. I pulled out onto the road and headed away from the diner lights, into the dark, already thinking about the bank statements. I'd saved the emails I'd sent to myself, and the one thing I still had that they hadn't taken from me yet. My dignity. I didn't drive home that night. Instead, I let the truck roll past my exit, past the flickering streetlights, past the quiet rows of ranch-style houses where folks were settling in for the evening. My mind wasn't on the road. It was drifting backward, months, maybe a year, trying to figure out when things had started to rot. Truth was, the cracks had been showing long before the birthday stunt. I'd just been patching over them with hope and excuses, like a man duct taping a leaking pipe instead of replacing it. It started with Marcy's volunteer nights at St. Mark's Lutheran Church. She'd come home late smelling like expensive perfume instead of potluck casseroles and dust. Her excuses were always sugary sweet, oh Jack, we were helping set up the charity auction, or we lost track of time sorting donations. But I'd been around long enough to know when a woman is coming home from work and when she's coming home from something else. Then Ethan started pulling away. Kid used to follow me everywhere, garage fishing trips, Hy-Vee runs for donuts. But as he got older, something in him shifted. Conversations shrank down to grunts. He kept his bedroom door closed. If I asked how school was, he'd look at me like I was interrupting something more important. And it wasn't just normal teenage stuff. It was sharper, meaner, like somebody had been whispering in his ear. One night as I sat in the living room watching an old Cubs game, he passed behind me and muttered just loud enough. Mom says you're holding us back. He said it like he didn't even realize he'd spoken out loud. I turned off the TV. What was that? He froze, blinked, then shook his head. Nothing. Forget it. But I didn't forget. Not that. Not the sudden cold shoulder. Not the way he'd tense up when I walked into a room. Not the way he'd look at his mom like she was the only person in the world telling him the truth. The night things shifted for real, I was sitting on a cracked vinyl stool at VFW Post 788, nursing a $2 draft beer, when Tom slid into the seat next to me. Tom's the kind of guy built like an old refrigerator square, dented and still running strong. He hung up his badge years ago, but the way he studies people never changed. He could see something was eating me alive. You look like a man chewing glass, he said. Just tired, I answered. He snorted. Nobody looks that tired unless a woman's involved. I laughed, but it came out thin. Tom leaned in. All right, tell it to me straight. What's going on? I told him about the late-night volunteer shifts, the coldness from Ethan, the way money seemed to evaporate from our shared checking account, like water through a cracked bucket. Tom didn't interrupt, didn't judge. When I finished, he tapped the bar twice with his knuckles. "You want the truth?" he asked. "Paper doesn't lie. Start keeping records, every statement, every bill. Email it to yourself. Turn every receipt into a weapon if you have to." He said it calmly like a doctor, explaining a simple treatment plan. I stared into my beer and felt something shift, like I'd been handed a compass in a foggy forest. So I did what he said. I checked the bank statements. I printed the ones from the last 6 months. I circled withdrawals I didn't recognize. I checked credit card transactions, nails, salon visits, out-of-town dinners. I emailed it all to myself. Then one cold Wednesday afternoon, I hired a private investigator. It felt wrong, like betraying my marriage. But deep down, I already knew Marcy had crossed the line. I just needed proof so she couldn't twist the truth later. The PI met me behind the VFW, handed me a manila folder, and said, "You might want to sit down before you open this." But I didn't sit. The first photo showed Marcy and a younger guy, late 20s, maybe early 30s, standing outside the front doors of St. Mark's. She was laughing, head thrown back, hand on his chest like they were in some sappy perfume commercial. He had his arm around her waist. Kyle, the co-worker she'd mentioned a few times. "Oh, he's harmless," she'd said. "He's just friendly." Friendly. The second photo caught them kissing beside her SUV, framed by the yellow glow of the church's parking lot light. My fingers tightened on the photo until it curled. I expected jealousy to hit me like a freight train, fire rage, maybe even grief. But what washed over me instead was heavier, duller. I felt stupid. I didn't feel jealousy anymore, I whispered to myself. I felt stupid. 20 years of overtime shifts, missed fishing trips, and this is what I got. The PI cleared his throat. There's more. Inside the envelope was a breakdown of withdrawals, transfers between accounts. Little bits here and there that didn't seem suspicious on their own, but added together they totaled around $15,000. $15,000. Money I'd saved for Ethan's future, for home repairs, for us. I drove home that night with the folder on the passenger seat like a ghost watching me. Marcy was in the kitchen when I walked in, smiling like she hadn't been wrapped around someone else the night before. "Hey babe," she said, "you okay? You look pale." For a moment I almost confronted her, almost slammed the photos onto the table, almost shouted, "Why like a man in a bad movie?" But something in me stopped. A small voice whispered, "Not yet. You're not ready." The next morning I almost convinced myself to forgive her. I told myself marriages go through rough patches, that maybe she had made a mistake, that maybe I wasn't blameless either. I told myself things only a desperate man tells himself when he's not ready to blow up the life he built. But that illusion shattered the day I saw Kyle behind the wheel of the used Honda Civic I had bought for Ethan, and Ethan was in the passenger seat laughing, pointing at something on Kyle's phone, pretending not to see me across the parking lot. They drove right past me. Didn't wave, didn't slow down. Didn't think twice. It felt like someone reached into my chest and squeezed. That's when the truth hit me. They weren't just replacing me. They were using everything I paid for to push me out of the picture. I stood there in the Hy-Vee parking lot holding a bag of groceries I suddenly couldn't feel, watching the taillights disappear. And I realized something. If they wanted me gone so badly, I could give them exactly what they asked for. But not the way they expected. I didn't pack much the night I left. A man learns by 55 that most of what he owns is sentimental clutter, things he'd never miss until the day he realizes he never cared for them in the first place. Still, as I filled 2 cardboard boxes with my clothes and a couple personal items, I stood for a long moment staring at the framed picture on the bedroom dresser. It was from a fishing trip with Ethan back when he was 10. He'd caught a bluegill, small, barely worth keeping, but the look on his face could have lit half the county. He'd begged me to take a picture. I'd ruffled his hair while he held the fish out like he'd reeled in a whale. I put that picture in the box last. Marcy watched from the hallway, arms folded, head tilted. "You're being dramatic," she said. "No," I answered, taping the last box shut. "Just giving you what you want." She scoffed. "You really think this is all my fault?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because nothing I said would matter anymore. She was already rewriting the story in her head. I carried the boxes to the truck, the night air thick with humidity. Cicadas buzzed in the trees, filling the silence she left behind. My new place wasn't much to look at, just a single room above Murphy's Hardware, the kind of old local shop that smelled like sawdust and machine oil the moment you stepped inside. The owner, a wiry, retired carpenter named Hal, handed me the keys with a nod. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said. "Don't slam the door. The frame's loose. Rent's due first of the month. Cash works best." I thanked him and climbed the narrow wooden stairs. Each step creaked under my weight. At the top was a long hallway, the paint peeling in places. My room was at the end, a small square space, with a bed, a tiny fridge, and a window overlooking the Hy-Vee parking lot. It wasn't home, but it was mine. I dropped the boxes on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the emptiness of the place settle around me. That's when the heaviness finally came. Not anger, not fear. Something deeper. Loss. Not just of Marcy, not even of Ethan, but of the years I couldn't get back. The years I'd spent working overtime shifts at Cedar River Packaging so Ethan could have new cleats for baseball. So Marcy could take those girls' weekends I now knew weren't girls' weekends at all. So the three of us could move into a house I'd never feel welcome in again. I sat there for a long time, elbows on my knees, staring at the scuffed floorboards. Then I wiped my face with both hands, stood up, and forced myself to breathe. Time to move. The next morning I woke early, habit more than choice, and walked across the parking lot to Hy-Vee for coffee. The automatic doors whooshed open, and the familiar smell of bakery bread and cleaning aisles hit me. Same old place, same old coffee station. But without Marcy's to-do lists or Ethan's half-shouted demands, the silence felt different. Peaceful almost. I filled a paper cup, grabbed one of those little French vanilla creamers, and sat at a small table overlooking the windows. A couple of old-timers were already there, arguing about whether the Cubs had a chance this year. A woman in a bright green Hy-Vee vest was stocking shelves, humming without a care in the world. For a few minutes I remembered what it felt like to be just a person, not a husband expected to apologize for everything, not a stepfather being slowly replaced. Just Jack. Then my phone buzzed. Hal, the hardware store owner, had sent a message. "Your rent drop box is the metal slot by the door. Don't forget to check the breaker panel if the fridge light goes out. Welcome aboard." The simplicity of it made me smile. No drama, no guilt trips, no silent, weaponized resentment. Just instructions for living. That afternoon, after settling in, I drove to the attorney's office on 10th Street. The building was a plain brick structure between a dental clinic and a shuttered insurance agency. Inside the waiting room smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish. My attorney was a soft-spoken man named Robert Harlan, mid-50s gray, at the temples, glasses perched at the edge of his nose, like he was forever reading something too important to set down. "What brings you in?" he asked as we sat down. I slid the manila folder across the desk. He opened it, looked at the photos, the statements, the bank records. He took off his glasses, wiped them with a cloth, and put them back on like he needed a clearer view. "Well," he said, "this is substantial." "I don't want a war," I replied. "I just want out. And I want what's fair." He nodded. Fair is a flexible word in divorce, but fraud, theft, and adultery aren't. "Fraud?" I asked. He turned to one of the photocopies. A loan application. My name typed at the top. A signature that looked close to mine but wasn't. "Your wife attempted to open a joint account under your identity," he said calmly. "That's fraud." My stomach flipped. "Kyle helped," I said quietly. Robert nodded. "Likely. And depending on how involved your stepson was, he may have unknowingly participated." "Ethan," I whispered, "he wouldn't." But even as I said it, I knew there was no solid ground under that hope anymore. Robert folded his hands. "We'll gather more evidence, but understand this, you're in a much stronger position than she probably expects." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the truth settle in. "So what now?" "We build a case. Calmly, methodically. No emotional outbursts. No confrontations. Let the documents do the talking." I thought of Tom's words, "Receipts don't lie." Robert continued, "If you want to protect your stepson from legal fallout, we can do that. But you must be clear about what you want." I swallowed hard. "I don't want to ruin the kid. I just want the truth out, all of it." He nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." When I left the office, the sun was dipping low. The sky streaked with orange and pink like a watercolor someone forgot to blend. I climbed into the truck and sat for a moment. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Please don't ruin Mom. She says you're trying to take everything from us. Just sign and walk away. Walk away. Funny how people want you to walk away, but only after they've taken everything they want. I didn't reply. As I drove toward VFW Post 788, my phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call from Robert. He spoke carefully like he knew the weight of every word. Jack, one more thing. We confirmed Marcy and this Kyle filed preliminary paperwork for a joint mortgage using your information. If it had gone through, you'd be on the hook for tens of thousands. The steering wheel felt slippery under my hands. She tried to put a house in both your names, he continued, but without your knowledge or consent. It's textbook fraud. The world outside the windshield blurred for a moment. I pulled into the VFW lot and shut the truck off. Inside, I found Tom sitting alone at the bar. When he saw me, he didn't say a word, just patted the stool beside him. I sat hard. And then for the first time since the birthday dinner, the weight of everything hit me at once. I didn't sob, not loudly, but tears fell and I let them. Tom rested a hand on my shoulder. Family doesn't mean you let them rob you blind, Jack, he said. You can love the boy and still say no more. I nodded, wiping my face. He was right. For too long, I'd let guilt and hope keep me chained to people who were already halfway out the door. No more. That night, back in my little room over Murphy's Hardware, I made myself a promise. They wanted me gone. Fine. But I wouldn't go quietly. I'd go the right way. My way. The Lynn County Courthouse looks exactly like what you'd expect from a Midwestern county seat. Brick facades, stone steps worn soft by decades of boots, a line of metal detectors inside that always squeak, even when you're sure you've got nothing on you. I'd walk through those doors before jury duty, paying a fine for a busted taillight, but never for something like this. Never to dismantle the life I'd built with a pen and a stack of evidence. The morning of the hearing, Cedar Rapids was gray and damp. Not raining, just threatening to. The kind of cold humidity that gets in your joints and makes you feel older than you are. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, breathing in the sharp air, letting it clear my head. My attorney Robert met me at the front entrance. He wore a simple navy suit, no flashy tie, no theatrics. Just a man who knew his job and did it well. You ready? He asked. As I'll ever be. He gave a small nod. Remember, stay calm. Let them talk. The more they talk, the better for us. Inside the hallway was buzzing with a low hum of footsteps and murmurs. People in jackets, people holding folders, people arguing in whispers. Justice in all its messy, everyday forms. Our courtroom was on the second floor. When we pushed open the heavy wooden door, my stomach dropped a little. Marcy was already there. She sat at the petitioner's table in a fitted blazer, much too fancy for a small-town hearing. Her hair was curled like she'd had it professionally done that morning. Kyle sat behind her, wearing a button-up that still had creases from the package. And Ethan? He sat 2 rows back, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor. He looked different, older somehow, and not in a good way. Marcy's eyes slid to me as I walked in. She flashed a smile, not warm, not nervous. Triumphant. Like she already won. Robert and I took our seats. The judge, a sturdy woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, entered and called things to order. Marcy's attorney, a slick-looking man with shiny shoes and an overconfident posture, stood first. Your Honor, to begin, we'd like to introduce a piece of video evidence demonstrating Mr. Collins's voluntary agreement to the divorce terms. Voluntary? Robert didn't react. He simply folded his hands and waited. The attorney clicked a remote and the monitor on the wall lit up. And there it was. The birthday dinner. The cake. Me holding the envelope. Marcy zooming in on my face like she was filming a prank for the internet. The moment I signed, I sat perfectly still, watching myself go through the motions, watching the flicker of humiliation cross my face, watching Marcy's satisfied grin behind the camera. When the clip ended, the attorney turned to the judge. As you can see, he said smugly, Mr. Collins willingly accepted the terms. There was no duress, no coercion, and Robert stood. Your Honor, he said calmly, may we replay the clip? I'd like to draw your attention to a few details. The judge nodded. Robert stepped closer to the screen as the video rolled again. Here he said, pausing the frame where Marcy lifted her phone. Note that Mrs. Collins announced the divorce in a public restaurant during her son's birthday dinner in front of multiple witnesses. Another click. Here he continued, pausing as the camera zoomed uncomfortably close to my face. Observe the angle. Mrs. Collins was not documenting a mutual decision. She was filming her husband's humiliation. You can even hear laughter from another table. The courtroom was silent except for the soft clicking of the mouse as he moved to the next frame. And here he said, stopping at the moment Ethan pushed the cake toward me, we see a minor, her son, being used to deliver legal documents. He let the still image hang there. A half-eaten slice of cake. A manila envelope. A father figure cut out of the family picture for entertainment value. Robert stepped back from the monitor. This is not evidence of mutual agreement, he said. This is evidence of emotional manipulation. Marcy's attorney shifted in his seat. The judge looked at Marcy over her glasses. Mrs. Collins, is this accurate? Marcy cleared her throat. It was just a family moment. We were trying to lighten the mood. Robert lifted a second folder. Now he said, let's look at the financial records. He handed copies to the judge and opposing counsel. These, Robert continued, are bank statements showing nearly $15,000 withdrawn from joint accounts without Mr. Collins's knowledge. And here he slid forward another sheet is a mortgage application submitted using Mr. Collins's personal information and a forged signature. A ripple went through the room. Even Kyle shifted uncomfortably. Marcy's attorney jumped up. Objection, that hasn't been verified. It has, Robert said, holding up a notarized affidavit by the issuing bank. The judge examined the paper skeptically. Mrs. Collins, would you like to explain why your husband's signature appears on a mortgage application he didn't submit? Marcy's face tightened. It was just a family thing, she said. We were handling finances together. It wasn't a big deal. The judge leaned back in her chair and let out a dry, humorless breath. Ma'am, she said, around here we call that fraud, not a family prank. The line hit the room like a hammer. A couple people in the gallery shifted. Kyle blinked hard. Marcy's jaw slipped open just slightly. And that's when the breaking point came. Ethan stood up. His voice cracked when he spoke. I didn't know, Your Honor. Mom told me Dad was leaving us. She said he was taking everything and I just believed her. Marcy whipped around. Ethan. But he kept talking. She told me to help with the paperwork, he said. I didn't know it was illegal, I swear. He looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time in a long time. Jack, I'm sorry. My throat tightened, but I stayed still, calm. The judge took a long breath. Thank you for your honesty, young man. You may sit. Ethan lowered himself back into his seat, shoulders shaking slightly. Robert closed his folder. Your Honor, in light of the financial misconduct, the forged documents, and the evident manipulation captured in the video, we believe Mr. Collins deserves full protection of his assets, compensation for the withdrawn funds, and a favorable dissolution judgment. The judge nodded slowly. I agree. Then she turned to Marcy. Mrs. Collins, you will be responsible for repaying the misused joint funds. The fraudulent mortgage application will be referred for further review. Mr. Collins will retain the home and his pension. Additionally, given your conduct, spousal support is denied. Marcy looked stunned, as if the world had suddenly tilted sideways. Kyle stared at the floor. Ethan wiped his eyes. And me? I finally felt my lungs fill all the way. As we gathered our things, Robert leaned toward me. Well, he said softly, that's a hell of a video for her to remember. I almost smiled. She wanted a video of my humiliation, I said. Instead, she walked out of here as the star of her own downfall. And for the first time since the birthday dinner, since the cake and the camera and the envelope, I felt something heavy lift off my chest. Not victory, not revenge, just release. When it was all over, when the courthouse doors closed behind me and the chill of the hallway gave way to the warm Iowa sunlight, I just stood there for a moment on the steps, feeling the weight slide off my shoulders. Not all at once, but slowly, like someone loosening a strap that had been cutting into my back for years. The sky was clearing. A soft blue pushed through the gray, and the air smelled faintly of wet pavement and distant cut grass. For the first time in a long time, I breathed without feeling that tight band around my ribs. Robert placed a hand on my arm. Take a few days, he said. Let yourself feel the wind. I nodded, shook his hand, and walked toward my truck. Inside the cab, I sat still for a long minute. The old Ford wasn't much rust on the wheel, well-faded flag sticker on the back window, but it had carried me through deployments, double shifts, and more winter mornings than I could count. It had seen better days, and so had I. But as the engine rumbled awake, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A beginning. Not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind you only notice when life stops shouting long enough for you to hear yourself think. I drove home. My home. The house that I thought I'd lose. The house Marcy had tried to use as leverage. The house where laughter had once lived before the walls absorbed too much resentment. The driveway felt different without her car parked there. Wider somehow. Cleaner. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It was quiet, so quiet I could hear the hum of the fridge before I even walked into the kitchen. I set my keys down on the counter, took a slow breath, and opened the refrigerator door. Inside were a few leftovers, a pack of eggs, half a loaf of bread, and plenty of empty shelf space. And that's when I noticed it. Her diet sodas were gone. All of them. For the first time in years, there was room for my beer again. I actually laughed, a small surprise sound, soft enough that it felt private, like something between me and the house itself. After putting a couple bottles on the shelf, I walked room by room, taking in the spaces I'd tiptoed through for so long. Without Marcy's endless knickknacks and scented candles and wall decor that said things like, live, laugh, love, the place felt honest. A little bare, but honest. Easier to breathe in. In the living room, I picked up the remote, hesitated, then turned on an old baseball game, Cubs vs. Cardinals. I kept the volume low, just enough to feel like someone else was in the room with me. For a while, I sat on the couch, letting the familiarity wrap around me like an old blanket. No tension, no waiting for raised voices, no tiptoeing around moods. Just me. Eventually, I got up and brewed a pot of coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, plain black, Folgers, nothing fancy, and it struck me how long it had been since my mornings smelled like this, instead of burnt candles and protein shakes. Around mid-afternoon, there was a knock on the door. I froze. Some habits don't die easy. Another knock, softer this time. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, hands shoved deep in his hoodie pockets. Hair messy, cheeks red, like he'd been crying or running or both. Hey, he said quietly. Hey. For a moment, neither of us moved. The last time I'd seen him, he was breaking in front of a courtroom, words spilling out like he'd been holding them in for months. I wanted to apologize again. I stepped aside. Come in. He walked in slowly, looking around like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. His voice cracked as he spoke. I didn't know everything he said. Mom, she made it sound like you were leaving us, like you were going to take the house and the money and... I don't know. I believed her. I nodded. I figured. He swallowed hard. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Jack. I didn't know who to trust. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, not closed off, just grounded. I forgive you, kid, I said, but trust isn't a light switch. You don't flip it back on in a day. He looked at his shoes. So, what do I do? I thought about that fishing trip years ago, about the way he looked at me like I hung the moon because I let him reel in a tiny bluegill, about the birthday dinner, about the courtroom, about everything between those two extremes. You show up, I said. You make better choices, and we build it back brick by brick, together, if you want to. He nodded slowly. I do. We ended up sitting on the front steps, drinking cans of soda root beer for him, the real stuff for me, and watching cars pass by in the late afternoon sun. And it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Later that week, I went to St. Mark's for the men's support group Divorcees, widowers, guys rebuilding their lives. We sat in a circle of metal chairs under fluorescent lights that flickered every so often, and we talked. Not about revenge. Not about blame. About loss. About starting over. About the small victories you don't notice unless someone points them out. After the meeting, Pastor Will shook my hand and said, sometimes the storm clears out. What you didn't know was blocking the sun. Simple words, but they stuck with me. And then there were the Friday fish fry nights at VFW Post 788. Tom and I would sit with our plates balanced on paper napkins, talking about baseball, or the weather, or nothing at all. Regular talk. Easy talk. The kind of talk you don't appreciate until you've lived too long in a house where every word might spark a fire. Weeks passed. The house felt more like mine every day. One evening, as I stood on the back porch watching the sun sink behind the maple trees, I realized something that stopped me cold. Revenge hadn't been the victory. Dignity was. Getting my life back was. Reclaiming my peace was. And forgiving myself for not seeing the signs sooner, that was the biggest victory of all. I'd spent years walking on eggshells, giving more than I had, shrinking myself to keep the peace. I thought love meant carrying the whole load even when it broke my back. But standing there on that porch, I knew the truth. Sometimes life serves you a cold, half-eaten slice of cake and calls it a gift. But dignity, that's something you bake yourself. And if you're listening to this wondering whether you're too old to start over, or too tired to fight back, or too worn down to take one more hit, let me tell you something from a man who's been there. You're not done yet. You've still got room to rise. And if my story gave you even a little strength, if it reminded you of your own worth, your own backbone, your own right to peace, then stick around. There are more stories like this, more rebuilt lives, more quiet victories. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming yourself again.